اولتر از همه من میخوایم تشکر کنم از انستیتوت مطالعات استراتژیک افغانستان و بالخصوص از دکتر زهورابیان که واقعا یک کنفرانس سنگین و باشکوه را برای انداختند. با نظر داشتی که مهمانان محترم ما امروز همه‌شان به لسان انگلیسی وارد هستند، من البته به اجازه شما صحبت‌های خودم به لسان انگلیسی ادامه می‌دهم. Distinguished and honorable guests, a very warm welcome to this morning's first opening session. My name is Nazar Mohammad. I'm the Deputy of the High Peace Council. It's a privilege to be the moderator of this morning's discussion and be amongst a group of such distinguished friends. Ladies and gentlemen, war is a nasty, crazy, and senseless act that has brought death and misery to millions, if not billions of people since the dawn of civilization. However, we human beings continue to kill one another in the name of freedom, justice, self-defense, and so on. Some say that it's part of our DNA, and others argue that it's a sense of our ego that causes wars. I think that you'll all agree with me that my country, Afghanistan, has possibly suffered the most during the 4 decades of the ongoing war than any other nation in modern times. The past 17 years with American involvement, this war also makes it the longest American war in this history. So perhaps it's time that we all get serious about putting an end to this ghastly war and let the Afghan nation have the right to live in peace, dignity, and self-determination. In this long war, this year has been like no other in the sense that we've certainly seen signs and are seeing signs that maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, I'm now referring to a possible peace deal with the Taliban. Perhaps the most significant milestone has been that all the sides have come to the realization that this war will not have a winner. So therefore, the only way forward is a peace settlement. Our panelists this morning will be discussing the vital question: what do the Taliban want? And I'm pretty confident, and I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the panel that you see in front of you is going to give you an answer which will be decisive. I can't think of a better group of diverse individuals who could be answering this important question. So without any further ado, please allow me to introduce to you the panelists of today. Our first panelist is a former US Secretary of State for South Asia. I'm delighted to have, of course, Ambassador Robin Rafael with us this morning in the session. Ambassador Rafael has had an amazing career that has stretched for almost 40 years. But perhaps what's even more important today is her connection to Afghanistan and this region that spans over 2 decades. Speaking with Robin, one always feels that Robin has a passion for Afghanistan and the Afghan people. So not only do we have an experienced politician here, but we also have a human being whose heart is in the right place. I think that I should also add, and this is just my calculated guess, that Robin may have had a very important key role to play in convincing the American decision and policy makers to have direct talks with the Taliban. So Robin will not only be talking about what the Taliban claims and what each side wants, but more importantly, she actually will be talking about what actually needs to happen for the talks to get serious. So without any further ado, I give the floor to you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Nazar, for that very kind introduction. And thank the Afghan Institute for International Affairs. I really appreciate being invited here. This is my first time at the Herat Security Dialogue. And it's fun to be here with old friends that I've known through the years. And it's particularly nice to be back in the city of Herat. I first came here many, many years ago in the early 70s. I was teaching at a women's college in Tehran, and we all took a bus from Tehran through Mashhad, across into Herat, Kandahar, Kabul. And of course, those were gentler days, more idyllic, and in many ways more innocent. But it's also wonderful to see what a bustling city that Herat has now become, very vibrant, and still preserving the marvelous cultural heritage which we heard so much about yesterday. I speak from the point of view of a private American citizen, and as Nazar said, I've been involved in this region for a very long time, and I have a great affection for Afghanistan and for the Afghan people, and most particularly for the cause of peace. And I come at this from a professional background, that is to say a diplomat, where one focuses on solving problems. And in order to solve problems, you need to understand the interests and motivations of the parties to a problem. And in that sense, I'm very accustomed, as are others in this room who've had this profession, of talking to all the parties to try and figure out how people feel about things and what's the possible way forward. Is the microphone working? Yeah, okay. So I've long been an advocate within the United States of the view that the United States needed to prioritize the peace process, needed to talk directly with the Taliban since that was an obstacle to moving forward, and finally to put someone very senior in charge of this effort. So needless to say, I was very pleased when the US did exactly that with the appointment of Zalmay Khalilzad. This was a hugely significant step for the United States. And as you all know, Ambassador Khalilzad has been in the region now for 3 or 4 weeks, talking with all the stakeholders, including the Taliban, to get a better idea of their concerns, of their seriousness about peace, and of their perceptions of the way forward. So this has been a change in US policy, and I want to just reflect a little bit on why that is, and some of Nazar's comments gave an indication of that. I think that there really has started to be a convergence around the idea that there really is a persistent military stalemate and that time is not on anyone's side. The US sees that there's no military victory. You've heard this even from commanders, from military officials, not just the civilians, that there's no military victory. And they can see that the Taliban is holding its own. The Taliban, I think, will admit that they cannot drive out the US forces. And that the passage of time for them as well is making the situation more complicated. You've got more players now. You've got ISIS, you've got Iran, you've got Russia, and who knows who else might come into the game. So this risks Afghanistan fracturing and potentially becoming more like Syria. That's not in anyone's interest, it's not in the Taliban's interest. I think the Afghan government now realizes that the US presence, as it's currently constituted, is not guaranteed forever. It's pretty clear that President Trump is frustrated with the situation in Afghanistan, and he's reportedly flirting with the idea of privatizing the war. I know no one here likes this idea, but Eric Prince, who is the real driver of this idea and has a big plan to privatize the war, has been advocating this all over Washington, and he's been out in the region supporting the same idea. And this has some resonance with President Trump. So the status quo of U.S. military and financial support for the war economy here is just not necessarily sustainable anymore. And the government of Afghanistan itself, I think, beginning to pick up on these things, has reached out to the Taliban in a very brave and bold way with an offer of peace talks and integration into the political system. From Pakistanis that I speak with, and of course I can't speak for them, but I gather that Pakistan has long concluded that the old strategic depth approach and the insistence on a friendly government in Kabul is not realistic for them anymore. Afghanistan is now connected to the world and more than ever determined to create its own destiny. And Pakistan, of course, has had its own struggle with the Pakistani Taliban. I think that's a bit of the law of unintended consequences, where their support for the Afghan Taliban redounded back in Pakistan itself. And then, of course, Pakistan is under increasing pressure from the United States. It's got a new government, which isn't experienced, and it's got a financial crisis that it has to deal with. So they, too, find the idea of Afghanistan at peace more appealing. And finally, the people of Afghanistan have made very clear through their peace marches, their support for the ceasefire and so on, that they're tired of war and want peace. So there's a moment being created here. But despite the awareness that there might be a moment here, there are still assumptions on the parts of the parties about one another that die very hard. We heard some of them yesterday. And so I really think it's important to look at these assumptions and challenge them as best we can. One of the assumptions that we've seen for a long time is on the part of the Taliban. And the Taliban had assumed that they could outweight the international forces. This whole idea that we have the watches and they have the time. And they thought that the Afghan government would collapse if the U.S. forces left, so they were prepared to wait. They're beginning to rethink this, but I'm not sure everybody on the Taliban side agrees with that. The U.S. has thought of the Taliban as the enemy, has thought that the Taliban hates Americans, they support al-Qaeda, they want to return to power in Kabul and reestablish the caliphate, and turn back all the social progress on women and other elements of society. Pakistan has thought, and I think to a degree Russia and Iran as well, that the U.S. wants to stay in Afghanistan indefinitely. They want to stay there to keep a watch on Iran and Russian activities and Pakistani nuclear program, you name it. That's been a very popular view that I've heard around the region. Afghanistan, and to a degree the U.S., have assumed that Pakistan wants instability in Afghanistan, that that's the purpose of their engagement there, and that they want to see the Taliban return to power in Kabul. Pakistan has assumed that the Afghan government wants to annex a part of KP province and create a Pakistan, and that the Afghan government would give bases to India to interfere in Pakistan. And of course the Afghan government assumes that many of their problems are Pakistan's fault. We heard a lot of that yesterday. So what I'm suggesting is that these are assumptions that need to be thoroughly questioned. Many of them are no longer true. In fact, most of them are no longer true. So I think it's important that people reconsider these assumptions that they've had and begin to listen to one another. So with that in mind, I'd like to offer what I have seen just through discussions over the years about what various parties to this conflict actually want. The Taliban I believe, based on what they say, they want recognition and respect. They want an end to what they see as a foreign occupation. They want to participate in the creation of a new political dispensation. They want respect for Islamic law. And of course, they want some kind of share of power. The US, first and foremost, needs guarantees that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and any such group that has an international agenda against the United States no longer has safe haven in Afghanistan. The Taliban, and of course the Afghan government, say, yes, we agree with this, but implementation is really very difficult and will probably require some kind of long-term US security presence in Afghanistan. Now, the US, under the Trump administration, is inclined to leave the future political dispensation of Afghanistan up to the Afghan people. You no longer hear from the US about respect for the Constitution, status of women, and so on. Many Americans, of course, remain concerned about those issues, but the government says less about them. The Afghan government, for its part, wants recognition as the legitimate government and to be first among equals in any political negotiation. And it wants respect for the Constitution and continued international military and economic support. Pakistan, for its part, wants no precipitous withdrawal of US forces. They remember what happened after the international community left when the Soviets left Afghanistan. They want security guarantees against Indian interference from Afghan soil. They want a government in Kabul that's non-hostile to it. They want trade access to Central Asia. They want respect for the Durand Line, and of course, resolution of the refugee issue. So that's what I see the various parties to this conflict wanting. And I would mention that Afghan youth also have a very clear idea of the kind of society they want, and they're determined to have a voice in getting it. So in order to get these both conflicting and sometimes common goals achieved, we need to be both patient and impatient. I think this describes Ambassador Khalilzad's approach. He's a man in a hurry, but he wants to take time to be thorough in his understanding of what the parties want. We need to move from just process to substance. All the parties need to articulate, at least to themselves in the beginning, what their real positions will be. We need to find a way to listen to all parties, not just the Taliban and the government. You need to socialize the idea of peace. Town halls, track 2 meetings, whatever, that give everybody a voice. In particular, civil society and women this time. Can't be just a bunch of old guys with beards who decide the future of Afghanistan. I know this is complicated, and I know that when we talk about an opening, it may sound naive, but I really do think there is a moment here, and it's up to everybody involved to do their part to take advantage of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was very informative. I think you'll all agree with me that Robin managed to cover a very kind of complex issue in just under 14 minutes. Well done. All right. On to my next guest and panelist. Bushra Gauhar is the only panelist that I've never met before, of course, until yesterday. Yesterday when I met her, I asked her, how would you like me to introduce you? And she humbly said that just tell them that I'm a former Pakistani MP. It's not so important who I am, but what message I'm delivering. So I think you'll all agree that this is a lady of substance. Of course, she's a former MP and a dynamic leader of the Awami National Party of Pakistan. And let me tell you, being a woman leader in all parts of the world is not an easy matter. And it takes twice as much hard work and effort to get there. So full respect to her and her achievement both academically and politically. Gawhar means jewel in the Dari language. And hopefully Ms. Gawhar will shine like a jewel with her presentation this morning. She will be enlightening us with her insight of what kind of state the Taliban envision and to what extent the Taliban leadership perspective differs from their rank and file. I'll give you the floor, please. Okay.
Salamuna, Salat Bakhair. Good morning, everyone. It's very interesting that I've been placed in this panel. I didn't ask for it. It's Dr. Muradian's doing. I don't know why he's placed me in this panel, but I'm going to try to do justice to this. I'd like to begin by thanking the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies for inviting me here. This is my first visit to Herat, the gem of Khorasan, or as Khatib Saab says, it should be the Khorasan of ideas. And I hope that the ideas that we are bringing to the table here are going to be taken forward. I would like to first start with a brief conversation that I had with a former diplomat, Pakistan's diplomat, and I'd also like to say that my views are my views. I'm not bringing any official views here. So these are my personal views. A former Pakistani diplomat who was appointed here during the time of Taliban. And I had a brief conversation with him, and he started telling me that that was the best time of Afghanistan. And I said, how do you describe the best time? I said the women were not allowed to do much, women were stopped, the whole culture was attacked. And he said, well, except for that, it was a very good time. So this glorification of the Taliban period that we hear more from the other side is something that we need to break. That is a myth that most of us know. And we still don't have such short memories. We have images of the Taliban period in Afghanistan and how it affected the people of the region. So I'm least interested in what the Taliban want. I'm more interested in what the people of this region want. And unfortunately, in all our discussions, which are very security-centric, we forget the people who have suffered the most. And that is why human security is more important when we go into these half-baked, so-called peace talks with the Taliban. What we try to do by doing that is giving legitimacy to those who massacred people here. And so I don't believe that there is going to be much achieved from these so-called peace talks with Taliban unless those who have stakes in peace are involved. And it is the people of Afghanistan, it is the people of the Pashtuns on the other side of the Darya. They have suffered the most. Taliban, in my opinion, is an anti-Pashtun project. It is not an independent body that states are sitting. They're giving them the legitimacy of a state, within a state in Afghanistan. And I agree with Ludin Saab, who said that the Afghan government tried to negotiate the release of one of the Taliban leaders. But it wasn't done. If we wanted to build confidence, that would have been the best approach in the region. To have the Afghans and the Pakistanis sit together and discuss the release of a Taliban, but to wait for the Americans and to have the release under circumstances that we are also not aware of is very strange for me. I don't see it as a step in the right direction. Transparency is needed in all these confidence, whoever is doing it, we need more confidence. The people need to know what were the circumstances. I'm fully in favor of the Afghans sitting and talking to maybe the foot soldiers, integrating the foot soldiers, but when it comes to the Taliban leaders who have blood of Pashtun children on their hands, I feel that they need to be brought to book rather than talk to. What message are we sending? Just because the Americans have decided that we want to leave, that we're pushing for a certain process that none of us really know, and we haven't really sat and discussed this. It has to be Afghan-led, and we must mean it when we say it has to be Afghan-led. We all say that it has to be Afghan-led, but we all have our own agendas for it. And that is not going to bring peace. We've seen the Afghan youth coming out. We've seen the Pashtun youth in Pakistan coming out. And they've started a peaceful struggle. They're the ones who are going to build pressure. And they're the ones who are the stakeholders in peace. It is the youth on both sides who are now putting their agendas on the table, and that is what we need, and that gives me hope. It's not the kind of things that I hear from external forces pushing for a so-called, what do the Taliban want? We have to see what their sponsors want. Who's supporting them? Taliban, for me, is not an independent body. So unless we talk to those sponsors and bring them to the table, change the policies that I find, these are demolition squads that are being used. And we're trying to say that they have stakes in peace. Every day they're attacking here. This year has been quite bloody as far as the Afghans have been concerned, the kind of attacks. Now, if they wanted peace, they would at least step back, and their sponsors would also step back. So, in my opinion, please, for the Afghans also, an internal debate is needed. An internal consensus is needed on what kind of peace, what do we mean by peace, and what does it mean by bringing these demolition squad leaders to the table. And who is going to talk to them? They are using the same arguments that I heard yesterday from many, that the Afghan government is corrupt, it does not have legitimacy, they want respect for this, they want respect for that. Well, the people of Afghanistan have already demonstrated that they want constitutionalism, they want democracy. The Taliban threatened the election process, but the people came out in large numbers to show that they are not going to be threatened or pushed against the wall. So the people have spoken. Now I wish that the leaders would also, and the international community would also listen to the people. Do not give us these half-baked ideas. We've already tried these so-called peace talks. I wish you would rename them also. You know, why do you call these talks with Taliban as peace talks? The peace talks have to be with the people, the stakeholders, the real stakeholders in peace. Not the attackers or those who've been killing people. So we have to move from the security-centric approach to peace. We have to broaden our engagement and bring the people of Afghanistan and the Pashtun on the other side as well, because they've suffered the most from these policies. Khatakistan explained Pakistan's suicidal policies very well. When I hear that Pakistan might be changing those policies, I don't see it on the ground. I still see funding for Fasad in Afghanistan. It's openly being said. In mosques, there are announcements that we are collecting donations for Fasad in Afghanistan. Now, you can't have both. Like the Taliban can't attack and also want peace. It can't happen. But also, with the regional players, you can't have these dual policies. Can't continue to support and also say we want peace. It can't happen. Yes, sorry. I've also seen stacks of books written on Taliban. The other day I was in one of the bookstores, and I can tell you that it is an overly studied and researched. There's no academic solution to it also. People are constantly, it is the political, we have to come to the table, but what I'm saying is the stakeholders or the states in the region have to also sit and talk to each other. I personally feel that whatever this so-called negotiation that is going on, without the Afghan government and the Afghan stakeholders, it is going to be meaningless. Pakistan has tried all these various peace talks and they've all failed. Only one was a transparent process, and that was done by my party in Swat. It was transparent, it was politically owned, however, that too failed. And so I'm saying this, you know, keep it open, engage with the people, start the debate. The other thing that I might suggest, and I don't know how it will be taken here, is that the Pashtuns on both sides of the Durban line have suffered the most. They've been used back in the Fasad in Afghanistan period as cannon fodder, and they're still being used as cannon fodder. We have to have a process of engagement among the Pashtuns as well, from all stratas, as to define what is it that we want. We can't be just spectators to our own destruction or the kind of environment that we have. The Pashtun youth have started the process, and they're trying to push the Pashtun leadership also to start raising certain issues. I've seen the Helmand peace process also, that gives us hope. But I think it is very important that the Pashtuns from both sides also sit together, because they've only seen in the past 40 years death, displacement, their livelihoods have been destroyed, and so it can't continue. The other thing is that no compromise on women's rights. Whoever is talking with these Taliban, please, we are not going to accept any compromises on our behalf. We are not and we'll tell you what peace really means and how we have been affected, the displaced women have been coping with this whole situation. So with those few comments, I feel it is human security that we need to put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everything. One quick remark I'd like to add to the presentation that we just heard. Of course, I think everybody wants an Afghan-led and an Afghan-owned peace process. However, there needs to be some homework done within the power groups in Afghanistan, or the islands of power individuals. And the High Peace Council, which I'm the deputy of, has been trying to get a political consensus towards peace. What we're finding is that, of course, there is political consensus about peace. Everybody wants peace in Afghanistan, but I think how to get there and what that actually looks like differs from groups to groups and from individual to individual, and this is something that needs to be focused on. I'm going to move on to my next guest. Shardul Rizai is a young lady and an Afghan MP from Ghazni that I have a lot of respect for. So much so that in fact I asked her to be my deputy for the 2014 presidential elections. However, it turned out that she was 5 years underage. And I'm sure that's the reason why I'm not the president of Afghanistan today. With hindsight, I'm pretty glad that I'm not. Ladies and gentlemen, Shardul's modest attire is a reflection of her modesty. But as a person, she's dynamic, hardworking, and has been an advocate of women's rights and anti-corruption drive here in Afghanistan. Ms. Rizai will be taking a very important subject, Taliban, Sharia, and traditionalism, and will be answering a vital question. Has the Taliban changed their perspective? Is the Taliban of 2018 differ from the Taliban of pre-9/11? With those remarks, I give the floor to you. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I prefer to speak in Dari because we want to keep the balance as well. عرض سلام و صبح خیر دارم خدمت تمامی حضار محترم. تشکر میکنم از انستیتوت مطالعات استراتژیک افغانستان که زمینه یک بحث بسیار مهم و در شرایط بسیار حساس افغانستان فراهم ساخته است. مثل که گفته شد، عنوانی که به مسیح بردم طالبان، شریعت و سنتگرایی است و باید پاسخ دهم که آیا طالبان در دیدگاه طالبان تغییرات به وجود آمده است یا خیر. من این بحث را میخوایم در 4 بخش خلاصه کنم. بخش اول شکل‌گیری طالبان، بخش دومی که میخوایم به اون بپردازم طالبان و استفاده ابزاری از شریعت و سنتگرایی. بحث چهارم این که آیا دیدگاه طالبان تغییر خورده است یا خیر. و بحث چهارم پرداختن به روند صلح افغانستان و انتظارات را که مردم افغانستان دارند. در بحث اول که شکل‌گیری طالبان در دیدگاه ما شهرت‌ترین عنوان در یک قرن اخیر در افغانستان می‌زنه. هیچ نهضت سیاسی در افغانستان در بیش از یک قرن گذشته به اندازه طالبان مرکز توجه قرار نگرفته است. طالبان که بعدها در قامت امارت اسلامی تظاهر یافت. No translation?
ترجمه مشکلات داره؟
ترجمه نمیشه. طالبان که بعدها در قامت امارت اسلامی تظاهر یافت، یکی از عواملی را که به خود اختصاص یافت نهضت اصلاح طلب اسلامی بود. ما اگر تاریخ نیم قرن گذشته را در جهان اسلام حداقل به بررسی بگیریم، بیشترین موفقیت‌ها یا بیشترین تغییرات سیاسی و اجتماعی را نهضت‌هایی به وجود آورده است تحت عنوان نهضت‌های اصلاح طلب اسلامی انکشاف یافته. طالبان هم دقیقاً با تکیه به همین عنوان با استفاده از مفهوم جهاد و تحت عنوان نهضت اصلاح طلب اسلامی وارد عرصه سیاست افغانستان شد. در حالی که ما و شما دقیقاً می‌دانیم که در حقیقت طالبان شاگردان ملاهای کمسواد افغانستان از یک طرف و شاگردان احزاب بنیادگرای اسلامی پاکستان بودند. ولی از اونجایی که ارتباط نزدیک با قلجات افغانستان داشتند، توانستند که ارتباط بسیار نزدیک را میان تحریک طالبان و قلجات افغانستان فراهم بسازد. اما این را ما می‌دانیم که طالبان از اونجایی که دیدگاه افراطی نسبت به دین و شریعت و ارزش‌های اسلامی داشتند، توانستند ارتباط بسیار نزدیک را در کمترین فاصله زمانی میان قلجات و تحریک طالبان ایجاد کنند. ما می‌دانیم که در افغانستان بنیادگرایی اسلامی قبل از ظهور طالبان و یا قبل از آغاز فعالیت طالبان وجود نداشت. اما طالبان با توجه به وضعیت نابهنجاری که در افغانستان حاکم بود، نابسامانی‌ها و بی‌نظمی‌هایی که در اثر موجودیت احزاب جهادی حاکم بر افغانستان فراهم ساخته بود، این جذبه را خلق می‌کرد که طالبان به سادگی با شعار بسیار ساده و آن هم رهایی افغانستان از قید رهبران فاسد و از قید بی‌نظمی‌های حاکم بر افغانستان وارد عرصه سیاست در افغانستان شد و با کمترین زمان ممکن توانست به جذبه بسیار بزرگی را در افغانستان خلق کند. عنوانی را که در آغاز طالبان به خود اختصاص یافت مبارزان مقدس بود و یا سربازان شکست ناپذیر خداوند. آغاز شکلگیری طالبان با این پیشینه نشان از این که اینها توانستند به درستی وضعیت بحرانی حاکم در افغانستان را تحلیل کنند و با استفاده از وضعیت و نابسامانی‌های موجود افغانستان به عنوان قدرتمندترین نیرو اختصاص بده به خود شهرت‌ترین عنوان را در تاریخ یک قرن افغانستان. اما طالبان و استفاده ابزاری از شریعت و سنت‌گرایی، ما اگر فعالیت طالبان را از آغاز شکل‌گیری تا این روزی که حملات تروریستی و انتحاری را انجام میدن یک به یک مورد بررسی قرار بگیریم، دو چیز ستونپایه اصلی مشروعیت طالبان قلمداد شده. از یک طرف شریعت و ارزش‌های اسلامی و ارزش‌های مبتنی بر شریعت و از یک طرف سنت در هر دو مفهوم، هم سنت در مفهوم سیره پیامبر و هم سنت در مفهوم باورها و رفتارهایی که از یک نسل به نسل انتقال پیدا می‌کند. سنت و استفاده ابزاری طالبان از شریعت در حقیقت دو پایه اصلی برای کسب مشروعیت طالبان بود. ما اگر زمان آغاز فعالیت طالبان در قندهار در سال 1994 ببینیم، طالبان با سنت شریعت و احکام الهی و با تکیه بر سنت‌های حاکم بر جامعه افغانستان در حقیقت وارد عرصه شد. ببینید عنوان طلبه و یا طلبه‌های دینی مدارس اسلامی در حقیقت با تکیه بر همین فاکتورها در نظر گرفته شده است تا با استفاده از عنوان طلبه و مدرسه از یک طرف می‌توانند جایگاه خود در جامعه سنتی افغانستان باز کنند و از یک طرف با محوریت قرار دادن ارزش‌های دینی و اجتماعی در فضای افغانستان جایگاه بزرگتری را کسب کنند. در اقدامات اولیه و نمادی در قندهار نشان داد که در حقیقت پاسداران اصلی سنت و سیره پیامبر، حامیان و کسانی که سازماندهی چیزی به نام طالبان بودند هم به درستی می‌دانستند. آنها آگاهی داشتند که جامعه افغانستان جامعه مبتنی بر باورها و ارزش‌های دینی است و با معتقدات و ارزش‌های دینی سخت پابندند و از طرف دیگر می‌دانستند که جامعه افغانستان باور و سنت‌ها و ارزش‌هایی دارند که در جامعه افغانستان به عنوان یک باور و سنت خلق شده است. با درک این موضوع، حامیان و سازماندهندگان طالبان به درستی توانستند که جذبه برای طالبان خلق کنند. جهاد مقدس و پاسداشتن ارزش‌های اسلامی از آدرس طالبان توجیه پاسداشتن ارزش‌های اسلامی در حقیقت رمز اصلی موفقیت طالبان بوده. ما می‌دانیم که کشورهای حمایت تسلیحاتی و نظامی و آموزشی داشتند و حمایت مالی کردند از طالبان، ولی در کنار این حمایت‌های تسلیحاتی و مالی که توسط بعضی از کشورها از طالبان صورت گرفت، ما باید بپذیریم که چی سبب شد که طالبان با سرعت زیاد در کمترین فاصله زمانی طولانی‌ترین نبرد را در افغانستان در برابر دولت و حامیان بین‌المللی افغانستان رقم بزنند. این همان دو فاکتور بود که دو فاکتور استفاده ابزاری شریعت و ارزش‌های اسلامی و معتقد بودن و یا پایه‌گذاری فعالیت‌های طالبان بر مبنای سنت‌های حاکم بر جامعه افغانستان. ما می‌بینیم که روند استفاده طالبان از سنت و شریعت و ارزش‌های اسلامی تا حدی بوده که امروز که روز است هنوز هم ما از آدرس شاید این حرف در اساس هم باشد، ولی هنوز است ما شاهد این نداریم که شورای علمای افغانستان، مراجع دینی و مراکز آموزشی دینی افغانستان بر علیه طالبان فتوای صریحی را کنند. اخیراً تازه به ابتکار شورای محترم عالی صلح افغانستان یک سری اقداماتی صورت گرفته، یک سری فتواهای توسط تجمع طالبان دین ارائه شده، ولی ما می‌بینیم که در بیش از 2 دهه گذشته هیچگاه یک حرکت منسجم و اساسی آنچه که مهمه برای ما شجاعت و فداکاری‌های آن تعداد از عالمان دین و نخبگان دینی را نمی‌توانیم از یاد ببریم که در برابر هر عمل طالبان ایستاد شدن و صدا بلند کردند، ولی چیزی که مهم است، چیزی که ضرورت شرایط افغانستان بود چی بود؟ فتوای مشترک و منسجم و دیدگاه واضح عالمان دین در رابطه به حملات تروریستی و انتحاری و انفجارات که از آغاز طالبان صورت گرفت. ما در بیش از 2 دهه گذشته شاهد چنین فتوای منسجم و منظم نبودیم. اما طالبان با فتوا آغاز کردن، با فتوا حکومت کردن و با فتوا توانستن لشکر جنگی خلق کنند در خلیجات افغانستان. اما واقعیت چیست؟ طالبان از 2 عنصر شریعت و سنت بیشترین استفاده را بردند، اما واقعیت این است که وقتی که ما می‌بینیم که طالبان امر به معروف و نهی از منکر و یا امر جهاد را به عنوان وسیله جهت تمرکز برنامه‌هایشان و جهت توسعه اهدافشان در افغانستان به کار بردند، اما واقعیت است که من به صراحت می‌خوام یادآوری کنم که طالبان کمترین اعتقاد نه به ارزش‌های دینی داشتند و نه به سنت‌های حاکم در افغانستان. نه امر به معروف و نهی از منکر به عنوان یک اصل دینی برایشان مهم بودند و نه جهاد را به عنوان مفهوم واقعی کلمه رسمیت می‌شناختند. برای طالبان چیزی که مهم بود استفاده ابزاری از دین و شریعت به خاطر پیشبرد فعالیت‌های طالبانیسم. دیدگاه طالبانیسم را با استفاده ابزاری از دین و شریعت و سنت توانستند در جامعه افغانستان تحمیل کنند. ما می‌بینیم که در آغازین سال‌های شکل‌گیری در دسامبر 1996 طالبان اعلامیه که در بخش امر به معروف و نهی از منکر که 225 زن به خاطر نقض قوانین پوششی مورد مجازات قرار گرفتند یا پرداختن طالبان و این که به کفش زنان حتی پرداخته میشه یا تعطیل کردن مکاتب دخترانه، اینا استفاده بسیار جدی و ابزاری از شریعت و ارزش‌های اسلامی و یک تفکر افراطی و بر قرائت نادرست از دین و ارزش‌های اسلامی است. بنابراین در یک جمع‌بندی از استفاده طالبان به عنوان ابزارهای پیشبرد سیاست طالبانیسم در افغانستان میتوان یادآوری کرد که آنچه که مربوط به تجدد توسط طالبان مورد تحریم قرار گرفتند و آنچه که مربوط به سنت و باورهای سنتی بوده همیشه تلاش شده پاس داشته شود. قرائت نادرست از دین جزئی از شاخصه‌های اصلی طالبان بوده، در حالی که هم انتحار را انجام دادن و هم برداشت افراطی از جایگاه و حضور زنان را همیشه در کوشش حفاظت از ارزش‌های دینی انجام داد. سربازگیری در خلیجات را نیز کوشش دینی دادند، اما ما می‌دانیم که هیچ اسلامی جز اسلام مورد نظر خودشان را به رسمیت نشناختند. در باور ما نه ترور و انتحار در منطق اسلام واقعی جای دارد و نه امارت اسلامی، حکومت اسلامی در مفهوم واقعی کلمه است. نه زن‌ستیزی افراط‌گرایانه در اندیشه اسلامی جزئی از ارزش‌های پذیرفته شده جهان اسلام است و نه اینکه شیوه‌های در پیش گرفته شده توسط طالبان مطابقت با سنت‌های پیامبر دارد. در حقیقت فقط دین، ارزش‌های دینی و سنت‌های حاکم بر جامعه و سنت در مفهوم سیره نبوی تنها ابزاری برای سیاست طالبانیسم بوده است. میریم به بحث سوم مختصر که آیا دیدگاه طالبان تغییر خورده است و یا خیر؟ جواب من متاسفانه این است که دیدگاه طالبان از روز اول تا حالا تغییر نخورده است و تغییر نخواهد خورد. آنچه که تغییر می‌خورد فرمول‌های پیچیده در سطح جهانی و منطقه‌ای است. آغاز شکل‌گیری طالبان همان گونه که یادآور شد در حقیقت بحث ایدئولوژی طالبان یک بخش قضیه است، اما بحث اساسی است که مثل که من قبلا گفتم طالبان به عنوان یک از ابزارهای سیاست خارجی بعض از کشورها برای افغانستان به کار برده شد و این در زمان تغییر خواهد خورد دیدگاه فرمول‌های پیچیده‌ای در سطح جهان و منطقه تغییر کنند. یعنی فرمولهای پیچیده‌ای که با شکل‌گیری طالبان توأم بود، فرمولهای منطقه‌ای که در سطح منطقه اتفاق افتاد و باعث شکل‌گیری طالبان شد، اگر این فرمولها مبتنی نیازمند تغییرات اساسی باشد، به این صورت دیدگاه طالبان هم در مطابقت و در مطابقت با دیدگاه تعریف خواهد شد. در رأی او دیدگاه طالبان من فکر می‌کنم همین گونه ادامه خواهد داشت مگر اینکه کشورهای بزرگ جهان در صدد تغییرات اساسی در فرمول منطقه باشد. نقطه اخیر بحث صلح در افغانستان است. می‌خوایم یادآوری کنیم که صلح یک ضرورت است. دولت افغانستان نماینده منافع ملت افغانستان است. ما به صلح ضرورت داریم، همزمان با آن به عدالت نیازمندیم. ما به صلح ضرورت داریم ولی به خاطر رسیدن به یک صلح آرمانی ارزش‌های پذیرفته شده در قانون اساسی را نمی‌توانیم به قربانی بگیریم. صلح ضرورت جامعه افغانی است در شرایط فعلی، اما به فراموشی سپردن زنان افغانستان و یا دستاوردهای یک نیمه گذشته افغانستان را هم به عنوان خطوط سرخ از آدرس دولت افغانستان به عنوان مدافع خواست‌های ملت نباید نادیده بگیریم. صلح به همان اندازه مهم است که عدالت مهم است و ارزش‌های پذیرفته شده در قانون اساسی. بنابراین صلح را با دو مکانیزم جدید باید پیش گرفت. بحث اول، صلح با حفظ عدالت و حرمت به ارزش‌های پذیرفته شده در قانون اساسی و دستاوردهای گذشته افغانستان. نقطه دوم، ما صلح را به پیش میبریم اما باید محتاط باشیم که صلح فروش مهره‌های سوخته طالبان بر دولت و جامعه جهانی نباشد. اگر جاگزین طالبان توسط حمایت کنندگان اصلی در قالب داعش و شبکه‌های تروریستی وارد عرصه سیاست افغانستان و عرصه بی‌ثبات سازی در افغانستان شد، صلح با طالبان، صلح با هر شبکه‌ای در حقیقت خریدن مهره‌های سوخته طالبان است. تشکر از توجه شما.
تشکر از صحبت شما. واقعا بسیار مهم است که خطوط قرمز معامله یا صلح از جهت مردم و ملت افغانستان و بالخصوص از قشر خانما ارائه شود و نباید هیچگاه و قربانی پروسه صلح شود. به هر صورت مهمان آخری ما یک دوست ماست به نام نظر محمد مطمئن. His resume is stating his achievement, but what I'd like to do is introduce you as the man that I know and I've come to know. I first met Mutmaeen Sahab in December of 2016, where we were both participating in a conference in Kandahar called Cry for Peace. We spent just a week in late General Rozik's guest house. His surname means certainty, and his character certainly reflects that. He always speaks with certainty and clarity and resolve. He has a reputation for being honest and outspoken, and that sometimes gets him into trouble. And then we end up knocking on doors and getting out of trouble. Anyway, Nazar Mohammad today will be talking about what are the Taliban's agenda and what specifically do they really want. With his vast experience and networks, I think he's the perfect candidate in this gathering to give us an in-depth insight on this subject. I give the floor to you, Mutmaeen.
د افغانستان د ستراتیژیکو څېړنو انسټیټیوټ د مشر مرادیان صاحب او همکارانو څخه مننه چې ماته یو وخت راکړی دی. زما موضوع د طالبانو سیاسي اهداف او څه وایي، ولې یو دوه درې دقیقې به زه په پرونیو او نننیو مسایلو هم خبره وکړم، ځکه زما لپاره ډېر د ویاړ ځای دی چې زه په دې غونډه کې ګډون کوم. ما فکر کاوه چې افغانان او بهرنیان به د طالبانو او افغان ټولنې په اړه باندې په دې 19 کلونو کې څېړنه کړې وي، ولې له قرون راهیسې ما ولیدل چې د طالبانو په پرتله دلته افراطي نظریات ډېر دي. زه باوري یم چې طالب دومره افراطي نه ده لکه موږ چې په داخل کې افراطي یو. او پخوا به دا خبره کېدله چې طالب پښتون دی یوازې، او زه خوشحاله یم چې خټک صاحب او میرمن بشرا دا رد کړله چې طالب انټي پښتون نه دی بلکې انټي پښتون دی. نو بهرنیان دې دا واوري چې طالب یوازې پښتون نه دی، او زه مننه کوم چې په داسې اساس وخت کې دوی دغو شیانو ته اشاره وکړه. او بلې دا خبره وکړه چې طالب په پښتون میشتو سیمو کې د ډیورنډ هغې غاړې ته ځای نه لري، او پښتون میشتې سیمې د دوی سره دي. هغسې چې ټول خلک پرې باندې خبرې کوي چې طالب ته په پښتون میشتو ځای کې ځای ورکړل سوی ده. او یو وخت کې خلکو دا خبره هم کوله، حتی تر الیس ویلز تر مجلس مخکې، چې طالب سره به هېڅکله امریکا مخامخ کښېنوي. ولې موږ ولیدل، او د خدای شکر ده چې د انګریز په وخت کې دا پاکستان نه و. که چېرته د پاکستان موجودیت په هغه جملو کې وای چې افغان او انګریز کړی، نو نن به پاکستان دا ادعا کوله چې انګریزانو ته د افغانانو په ځای دوی ماتې ورکړې ده. ولې هغه افغانانو چې انګریز ته یې ماته ورکړله، او هغه افغانانو چې روس ته یې ماته ورکړله، او هغه افغانان چې امریکا ته ماته ورکوي. دا دې د افغان خلکو امتیازات په ځان پورې نه تړي. او د پاکستان لپاره، او خصوصا زموږ د ډیورنډ هغې غاړې لپاره، د پښتنو لپاره همدغه بس ده چې ضعیف صادق لاس تړلی بربنډ امریکایانو ته ورکړ. زه د دوی په ځای باندې شرمېږم. کاشکې دوی د هغه په ځای باندې هغه ننګه کړې وای. دوی به انټي پښتون نه وي، طالب انټي پښتون وای، خو دوی به له یو چا نه دفاع کړې وای. او هر هغه څوک چې پخوا یې جهاد په پاکستان پورې تړی، او نن طالب په پاکستان پورې تړي، هغوی آګاهانه یا غیر آګاهانه د ایسای او د پاکستان د پوځ لپاره لابي کوي، تر څو بیا طالب په نامه باندې پاکستان بیا هم هغه ډول امتیازات واخلي لکه په 1990 کلونو کې چې زموږ د مجاهدینو د بې تجربګۍ له امله امتیازات پاکستان ته ورکړلو. او خټک صاحب هم دا خبره به راسره تایید کړي، 2 کاله مخکې چې رستم شاه مومن په همدغه هرات امنیتي کنفرانس کې غونډه لرله، بیا کابل ته راغی، او د انجینر صاحب احمدشاه په کور کې موږ ولیدی. هغه وویل چې یو ځل پرویز مشرف چې د پوځ رئیس و او د پاکستان مشر و، په نشه حالت کې چې زه هم هلته ناست وم، ویې ویل چې بوش سره ما وعده کړې ده چې پښتون به د ډیورنډ هغې غاړې ته زه درته ختموم، او دې خواته په افغانستان کې به تاسې ختموئ. کله چې پرویز مشرف د ایسای د پوځ مشر دا خبره کوي، زه غواړم چې په دې باندې څېړنه وشي. راځم اصلي موضوع ته، ډېره بخښنه غواړم. طالبان څه غواړي او څه یې اهداف دي؟ په تېره 11 لسیزه کې چې د افغان کشالې د حل او سولې ته رسېدو کومې هڅې شوې دي، په دې کې عمده ستونزه دا وه چې واقعیتونه نه درک کېدل، او هڅه کېدله چې د دې پر ځای چې د طالبانو اصلي غوښتنې په پام کې ونیول سي، هغوی کمزوري سي، وویشل سي، د سولې مذاکراتو ته په ضعیف حالت کې د فشار په نتیجه کې کېنول سي، او مقابل لوری په قوي او برلاسي حالت کې وي. د پیسو او چوکۍ له لارې طالب تطمیع شي. د سولې اکثره پروګرامونو هدف دا و چې طالبان په اوسني سیستم کې مدغم کړي، ځکه د هغوی په اړه داسې یو تصور موجود و چې د چوکۍ یا مادي امکاناتو لپاره جګړه کوي. د سولې د دغو پروګرامونو د ناکامۍ عمده عامل همدا و چې د طالبانو اساسي غوښتنې یې له پامه غورځولې وې. د طالبانو اساسي غوښتنې څه دي؟ 2 غټې غوښتنې چې طالبان یې لري. لومړی، د بهرنیو ځواکونو بشپړ وتل، البته د معقول مهالویش او د منظمې پروسې له مخې او له نړیوالو تضمینونو سره. د داسې اسلامي نظام قایمېدل چې د ټولو افغانانو استازیتوب وکړي او د هېواد د کلتوري او دیني ارزښتونو ساتونکی وي. د اسلام پر معتدل قرائت باندې ولاړ وي. اکثره خلک د طالبانو په اړه لا هم ناسم پوهاوی لري. ګمان کوي طالبان یا انحصاري اسلامي امارت غواړي، لکه میرمن شاول چې ویل دا یو تېروتنه ده چې موږ یې کوو، او یا د هېواد په مشخصه جغرافیوي ساحه کې واکمني غواړي، او یا دا چې دوی له نورو سیاسي ډلو سره پر ګډو اوسېدلو باور نه لري، نو ځکه به د دوی راتګ په هېواد کې د یو نه ختمېدونکي کورنۍ جګړې فصل بیا پرانیزي. د دغه ناسم پوهاوي لپاره څو نقطې لازمې دي. په مابین کې د طالبانو د ظهور عمده عامل په هېواد کې ګډوډي او کورنۍ جګړه وه چې هېواد یې د تجزیې له ګواښ سره مخ کړی و. زه چې څومره پوهېږم طالبان به په هېڅ بیه داسې معامله ونه کړي چې د هېواد د تجزیې باعث شي او یا د کورنۍ جګړې او شرارتونو لامل وګرځي. له همدې امله اوس د جنګ او ګډوډۍ د مرحلې د رسوباتو د ریښو د ایستلو په خاطر قوي مرکزي نظام جوړول اړین او ضروري دی. طالبان په کافي اندازه هغو پخوانیو سیاسي تېروتنو ته متوجه دي چې د جګړې عامل شوې وې، نو ګمان نه کوم چې د هغو تکرار ته دې په هېڅ بڼه زړه ښه کړي. دا په 22 کلونو کې د طالبانو د سیاسي پوهاوي د پوخوالي نتیجه ده چې سړی په ډاډ سره دا خبره کولی شي. بل ناسم پوهاوی د طالبانو په اړه دا ده چې هغوی به د تېرو 19 کلونو لاسته راوړنو ته خطر پیش کړي. څومره چې زه خبر یم هغوی داسې ارزښتونو ته چې د اسلام په معتدل قرائت کې ځای شته دی ژمن پاتې دي، لکه په خپل چوکاټ کې د بیان ازادي، د ښځو تعلیم، د بشر اساسي حقونه، د ګاونډیو هېوادونو او نورې نړۍ سره ښې اړیکې. زه خپله په دې باور یم چې سوله باید په هېڅ ډول دغسې لاسته راوړنې او ارزښتونه له خطر سره مخ نه کړي، بلکې نور یې هم تقویه کړي. افغانستان نن تر بل هر وخت د خپلو بچیانو او نوي نسل د تعلیم پر مخ جوړېدا ته اړتیا لري. همدارنګه د افغانستان د اوږدمهالې اقتصادي ښېرازۍ لپاره د نړیوالو دوستو هېوادونو اقتصادي مرستو ته اړتیا ده. په داسې یو وهمي اساس چې سوله په افغانستان 90 کلونو ته بېرته وګرځوي، د سولې مخالفت کول هېڅ توجیه نه لري. هره ورځ په متوسطه توګه له 100 تر 1.5 افغانانو وژل کېږي. له هر لوري څخه هم عسکر او هم طالب، هم افغان دی او هم مسلمان دی. د دوی په وژل کېدو افغان میندې بورې کېږي او ماشومان یتیمان کېږي. سوله تر بر هر وخت زموږ اړتیا ده، اما باید واقعیتونه درک کړو او د سولې لپاره قرباني ورکړو. که هر څوک پر خپل موقف او چوکۍ او غوښتنو ټینګ وي، سوله نشي راتللی. ډاډه یم که د بهرنیو ځواکونو د وتلو مهالویش د امریکا او ناټو لخوا له تضمین سره اعلان شي، طالبان به هم اوربند اعلان او له نورو افغان سیاستوالو سره به د حکومت پر نوي جوړښت او ډول موافقې ته ورسېږي. هغه خنډونه چې د سولې لپاره مخکې لرو. زه چې څومره پوهېږم د سولې عمده خنډونه تر اوسه لاندې دي. اول، پر دې ټینګار کول چې یو څه بهرني ځواکونه باید د اوږد مهال لپاره په افغانستان کې پاتې شي، د دایمي اډو په بڼه او یا په بل هر بڼه. دوم، په دې ټینګار کول چې طالبان باید اوسنی اساسي قانون ومني او له اوسني نظام سره یو ځای شي او د حزب اسلامي په څېر دې د نظام له داخله د خپلو اهدافو لپاره کار وکړي. دا یو عمده تېروتنه ده چې د سولې مخه یې ډېر وخت کېږي نیولې ده. له یو نوي اساسي قانون او له نوي نظام پرته سوله امکان نه لري. البته دا به په دې معنا نه وي چې زموږ هغه ملي بنسټونه چې په تېرو 19 کلونو کې را جوړ شوي هغه باید ونړول شي او له سره بېرته جوړ شي. دغه بنسټونه له ځینې اصلاحاتو وروسته د طالبانو لپاره جوړجاړی وړ ښکاري. البته د نوي نظام او اساسي قانون پر لوري یو ابتدایي ګام کېدای شي د موقت حکومت په بڼه واخیستل شي. دریم، د سولې په اړه واضح تګلاره نه لرل او پر دې ټینګار چې سوله باید داسې راسي چې اوسني واکمن اړخونه پکې خپلواک او ځایګۍ په پوره توګه وساتل شي. زما شخصي نظر د هیڅ چا استازیتوب نه کوي او هغه څه دي چې په مختلفو نړیوالو کنفرانسونو او د طالبانو سره مخامخ لیدلو کې یې ترلاسه کړي دي. والسلام علیکم ورحمة الله وبرکاته.
Nazar Mohammad said, when we think of Afghan friends in the past 17 years, one name always strikes us, perhaps more than any other. Today we're lucky to have with us an exceptional gentleman whose name is Kai Heidi, of course, and we would like to invite him to give some remarks. Please. Would you like to come, or are you quite comfortable where you are? Wonderful. Can we get a mic, please?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Just a few comments to what was said from the panel. First of all, perhaps to Mr. Rafael, you said, I'm pleased to know that we now seem to be starting a process. And I'm pleased to see that Mr. Khalisa has been appointed. Then you said, he's a man in a hurry. He's a man in a hurry. And then I think many of us have, for more than a decade, asked the US and others to look at the political solution. More than a decade. As SRSG, I was the first to raise the issue in the Security Council. I was met by a cold shoulder, negative attitude from the US and from almost all permanent members of the Council. But now you're in a hurry. And I must say, it gives me a little bit concern, makes me worried. When I started my work as SRG, a prominent American said to me, Mr. Iden, no surprises, please. No surprises. That I remember. And I think this is something I would like to turn back to the US now. Please, no surprises. No shortcuts. No surprises, no shortcuts. And I say that because, yes, we all want to make deal. I think the Taliban also, I have been in touch with them for many years. I think there's much right in what you said in the last statement. I think they have been ready for a dialogue of the kind we now see emerging for quite some time. What do we want, all of us, friends of Afghanistan? We want a sustainable peace agreement. We don't want a peace agreement that is entered into because someone is in a hurry all of a sudden. We want an agreement that respects what has been achieved. Now, can that be done in a short period of time? Well, if it can, that's fine. But I think most of us have the experience from previous other peace negotiations that it takes time. The first thing you have to do, and I'm talking to you now that you're saying that you're not a representative of the US government, and I'm not a representative of my government. But you need to build the trust needed between the parties. And for the US that means to be sure that there is a firm basis of trust with the Afghan government. That is the key to any kind of sustainable agreement. It could take months, but most probably it will take longer. I know that you have an impatient president, very impatient president. So we are all impatient, absolutely all of us. for those who have been here for many years, do not want to stay longer than necessary, but we want to stay as long as necessary. With our security force, but also in particular with our economic engagement and social engagement. Remember also when you have an invasion president, the Afghans have a complex political timetable ahead of them that will distract the attention also from the peace process. Take that into account, make sure that we proceed in a safe and secure basis. And then the final point. You, the US, always ask allies, international organizations, etc., to join you in the efforts in Afghanistan. And you did. Now all of a sudden, you want to do everything alone. No surprises, I would say, but that's how it is. You will also need at one stage assistance from somebody who is not a party to the conflict. And you are a party to the conflict. Somebody who can help design the process, conduct it, calm things down when things are rough, when there are threats of breaking off talks, etc. Please keep that in mind when you proceed. I think that is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those remarks. I'll take some questions, but let me introduce someone else also to you. Someone who we've known to be connected and associated with the peace process for a very long time. Of course, his name is Paolo, and he represents Pagwash. I think you wanted to make a few remarks, and then we go to the main Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, crisis fast. Let's get to some key points. Key points number one. Is military victory possible or not? At this point, I don't know who can be the victor. But the answer is that there is no possibility of a victory. There is no military victory. On this, the government, the foreign forces, the Taliban all agree. The alternative to a military victory is a negotiation. So if we do that, then we don't have to discuss too much who is the other part of the negotiation. We cannot criticize the other part of the negotiation. We have to say, okay, let's facilitate this conversation. Let's facilitate the way in which we can have a peace agreement. We have to discuss, certainly. We have to toss around ideas. Rush is not needed in this situation, as I was mentioning before. But look, we have not an infinite amount of time. The situation here has been deteriorated for a long time. We had around 40 years of war in Afghanistan. And the last 70 years have been particularly critical. Do you want this to go on forever? Do we want this to go on for an infinite amount of time and possibly to involve other countries in the region? I think that's something we should be very careful. We don't want chaos to spread. We want to have a possible solution. And for that, we have to open our mind. Some of our friends from, in fact, particularly the friend from Pakistan, was mentioning the fact that the Taliban are supported by someone else. But who is supporting the government of Afghanistan? The Taliban have been kicked out by the Americans. The Americans paid $1 trillion from the beginning to now. At least $1 trillion is $1,000 billion. With this amount of money, they would have transformed Afghanistan into the Switzerland of Central Asia. So, who is supporting what? See from the Taliban point of view. We are supported by, say, Pakistan or someone else, and we supporting them. So I think the idea of support is something we should not take into consideration too much. Again, our friend from Pakistan said, We want to talk with the militants of the Taliban, not with the leaders of the Taliban. Good, do it. We want to convince the militants that they should not follow anymore the leaders. If you succeed, then good for you. Doesn't seem possible to me. Plus, look, you want to fracture the Taliban movement? It's better to interact with one cohesive and unified movement, or it's better to interact with a variety of small groups that operate separately? I claim that interacting with a movement which is unified is much easier. You don't need to be supporting of the movement itself. You need to have an interlocutor. Other point, and then I want to finish with this. Do the Taliban accept modify their views? I think so. We had experience talking with the Taliban in Doha, in Peshawar, and I think the attitude is in principle different. It's totally different. There is something still we need to, if you want, we would like to be different, yes. But there are signs of the movement. There is sign in which, in fact, even from a Taliban point of view, they accept the possibility of a disagreement. So, they say explicitly they don't want a monopoly of power. They say explicitly about human rights and women's rights. They will be able to implement, it's another story, but at least recognizing that these are important issues is a common viewpoint of all the partners. There are others who think differently. ISIS is one. Is ISIS a danger which can be put together with the Taliban? No, they are separate. ISIS and Daesh, the way you can call it, are separate from the Taliban. So better to keep this separation wide and don't merge together all the opponents of the government.
Paolo, can you?
Okay,
because of
I know. But I want to. The last sentence is, we need to, if you want to have a peace agreement, we don't want to have only one part of the involved people or group of people. We want to have the most possible wide representation of all different groups. Peace process should not be a political issue in Kyrgyzstan for internal political issue in Afghanistan. Peace process should be something which is non-partisan. Should not be used as an instrument for one which is pushing for his own candidacy as president or whatever it is. I think the peace process should be involved with all the people and should be the most wide possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your work. Right. I've got a list of people. We have very limited time, so I can't take everyone, but I will take 4 or 5 that raised their hand in the beginning. We'd like to start with, I think, Barney, you're the first one, and you're the elder one, so we will. Please, you both did. Barney, sorry, Barney, one moment. He's got the mic, after that is you. Yeah.
Thank you.
He's got the mic, I'm sorry.
Sorry, but this is former Senator Rasif Khatak from Pakistan. Well, very quick comment, very brief. First of all, I think it's very important to know that foreigners have tried to tamper with Afghan national identity during the last 4 decades. It's very important. You see, Afghans have been Muslims for the last 1,000 years. After Mahmud al-Ghazna, they became Muslim. Muslim Afghan has been an identity. But you see, they try to exaggerate this Muslim part of this identity, not for the love of Islam, but to weaken the Afghan part of the identity. So this is very important, and I think with the rise of Taliban, this aspect accentuated. And we have seen madrasas, we have seen Salafism, Takfirism getting roots in Afghanistan and in region in Pakistan also. So this is one that I want to. Second, my friend said that Mullah Zaif's handing over to Americans. I believe, I was working in Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, and we condemned the government of Pakistan for doing that. But it was done by the very patrons of Taliban, the ISI of Pakistan. We actually handed him over to America, not we. we opposed, we criticized, because he was an ambassador. Ambassadors are not supposed to be given any work. And second, third is the last.
Questions for the panel?
No, it's coming, no. The third is the present American position. I mean, I really, I'm reminded of Soviets in 1988 in Kabul. I met Yuri Vorontsov, the Soviet ambassador of that time. He asked me about Gorbachev's plan for withdrawal. And what were my reaction? I said, it's a good plan, but I think Afghanistan is a very unlucky patient because the good medicine reaches late when the disease has entered another stage. So I think this is a very good idea in both Corona conference. America should have included Taliban and other people at that time. But now Taliban say we have won the war. We are victors, and the victors will dictate their conditions. Now people have lost the war. Thank you.
Thank you for your work, Mr.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Mr. Mutmaeen. I want to ask you, Mr. Mutmaeen, after foreign troops withdraw from Afghanistan, Taliban want to destroy, to demolish the Islamic system and establish the Imarat Taliban, or Taliban want to part and share to the power. I asked you by which method Taliban can to be part of the power and share to the power. Thank you very much.
Very good question. Thank you very much. Barney, please. Mike for Barney, please.
Thank you. I just want to inject part of my saying some reality into this. I hear that negotiations have failed. So what has succeeded? Has war succeeded? Has changing the national security paradigm of Pakistan succeeded? Nothing has succeeded. So you cannot say that any particular policy is wrong because in the past it has failed. They have all failed. So the question is how to succeed, not to explain that what someone else is going to do will fail. Now, as far as what to do, and what Kai said, I agree with everything Kai and I just said, but it's completely irrelevant. Because, and just as the argument because American policy toward Afghanistan is not made in order to achieve goals in Afghanistan. It's made to achieve American interests as understood by the administration in power. Donald Trump does not want to have an indefinite commitment to Afghanistan. Therefore, any political strategy by any Afghan that is based on the idea that the Americans will be supporting you is mistaken. Now, you have to think in terms of the actually existing balance of power, which is not simply the Taliban are winning, because as I believe Mr. Mutmaeen said, they think maybe they can defeat the other side, but that will not be a victory for them, because they will not be able to rule Afghanistan either. Afghanistan will become like Syria, or worse, or like it was before. So there's an opening. There are changes in the region. Changes are not just in people's heads, or what they think. Changes are also in reality. The relative power of different countries, their interests. Those things are changing, and they give us reasons to try to find a negotiated settlement. Because, unlikely as it is to succeed, it's a better option than continuing the war that we know will definitely not succeed.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Gentlemen with the glasses.
دوستان عزیز، من از شنیدن این صحبت‌هایی که
اگر خدا معرفی کنید محترم.
و از تاجیکستان عبدالله رهنما، از این دو روزی که صحبت در مورد صلح و طالبان میشد، می‌خواستم چند نکته همچون کامنت بگیرم، زیرا در پروسسی یا پروژه صلح تاجیکان من سکرتری شورای صلح بودم. اون وقت 25 ساله جواب بدید. یعنی باید پروژه صلح هم به طور زنده گذراندیم. و البته جنگ اصولی تاجیکستان خیلی فرق داره. عاملاش دیگر بود، وضع افغانستان خیلی مرکب‌تر است. اما یک دو نکته هست که من می‌بینم که در اینجا حال جامعه افغانستان به همون چی نرسیده. شاید جامعه شهروندی متفکران، چون که اینجور گذاشتن مسئله که طالبان قانون اساسی را بپذیرن، سلاح خود را بگذارن، اینو بیارن صلح. همین فرمولی هست که هیچ وقت صلح را تامین نمی‌کنه. یعنی ما در تاجیکستان برعکس همین را داشتیم در فرمولی صلح که بیاید قانون اساسی را از نو با هم می‌نویسیم. یعنی ما 2 سال با اپوزیسیون اسلامی قانون اساسی کاملا جدید نوشتیم که من اونجا سکرتریام بودم که هر یک بند قانون اساسی رو کمیسیون مشترک در 1 هفته 2 هفته می‌نویسید. همه زیر یک بند امضا می‌کردن. گفته که یک بند قبول شد. باز هفته دیگه یک بند. 2 سال فقط قانون اساسی نوشته شد. یعنی نگفتیم که بیا قانون اساسی ما قبول کن و صلح کن. این تو نبود. دوم، پروژه حقوقی، پروژه سیاسی ما 30% تمام قدرت دولتی از بالا تا روستاها را با اونا دادیم. نگفتیم که شما سلاح بسپرد یا تسلیم ما شدید. سوم این که در پروژه صلح تاجیکو 10,500 نفر نظامی مسلح اپوزیسیون اسلامی را ما در ترکیب نیروهای دولتی ادغام کردیم، رینتگریشن کردیم. یعنی که اونا نرفتن سلاح سپار با همه کماندانهای خود، با سلاحهای خود، با گروپ‌های خود، اونا آمدن در وزارت دفاع، وزارت داخله، وزارت امنیت گروه شدن. سردار کماندان منطقه شدن. با یک فرمان رئیس جمهور 11 نفر کماندان اپوزیسیون عنوان ژنرال داده شد که اونها راضی باشه از وضعیت، بدونه که شما تسلیم شده به صلح. و پروژه اقتصادی، یعنی ما اونها را در منافع اقتصادی دولت شریک کردیم. به هر یک کماندان یک کارخانه پنبه، یک کارخانه طلا و یک چیزی داده شد که اونها راضی شدند که اونها جزئی منافع کشور هستند. بنابراین تا زمانی که این کار نکردیم صلح نشد. اما بنابراین من نمیگم که این مدل برای افغانستان موافق است، اما تا زمانی که ما خود را یک طرف جنگ احساس می‌کنیم و اونا را ما خود را افغانستان می‌بینیم، او را گروه بیرون، امکانی کم است که ما بیان صلح کنیم. بنابراین شریک ساختن اونها هم در قدرت سیاسی، حقوقی، اقتصادی و ما آخر بگم که عفو تاجیکستان چی شده است؟ عفو نام به نام ما میگفتیم. یعنی ما همین 20,000 نفر اعضای اپوزیسیون را لیست کردیم با یک قانونی که پارلمان قبول کرده است، نام به نام عفو شده است و به دست هر یکش یک شهادتنامه داده شده است که تو عفو هستی و هیچ ارگانی تاجیکستان با تو کار ندارد. بنابراین عفو نام به نام انجام شده. بنابراین اگر این قدر جرأت برای صلح نباشد، اون امکان نداره. و در خلاصه بگم که یعنی که مدل ما این بود که حزم کردن اپوزیسیون در داخل سیستم، اول اینجا محو کردن اپوزیسیون در خارج سیستم رفتن ایجاد دارد. بنابراین مدل ما کمتر فرق داشت. اگر برای اون البته دولت کمی لازم است که توان از او را حل کند. این تجربه ما این خیلی بود که خصوصا توجه کردن خوب است.
زنده باشید. تشکر. فعالیت با مایکی طرف اگر داریم. دیروز
السلام عليكم ورحمة زهم فقط مختصرة تفصيلية أو يوجد ثاني في one person from لبنان التي ربنا في الكتب أو شيء كمان استعمل كفجور هالنرازي أو كمكان فجور ما يقول شهادوي نشرت أو كتالبان هم قولي وكان زور أو جنب يهلا دا خبره حقیقت ده چې ټول ملت صلح غواړي. لکه چې جناب نعیم صاحب په خبرو کې وویل چې یو ملي اجماع هم موجوده ده د سولې په راوستلو کې او ملت په دې کې متحد دی کې شک نشته. دا یوه خبره باید واقعیتونه افغانان ووایي چې په افغانستان کې د شوروي اتحاد له وخته نیولې تر اوسه پورې جنګونه استخباراتي بڼه لري او دې کې د افغانستان ولس اساسي محرک د جنګونو نه ده بلکې خارجي ابعاد لري. دې ته باید حقیقت سره پاملرنه وشي او دا اړخ باید هېر نه شي. د شوروي په جنګ کې صحیح دی د افغانستان ملت قرباني ورکړه ولیکن دې کې شک نشته چې د شوروي اتحاد د جنګ ملاتړ ټول غربي ملکونه وکړي.
قاضي صاحب اگر سوال مشخص
نه دا دغه کې اشتباهات صحیح ده چې ټولو کړي دي مخکې د جهاد په وخت کې کړي دي یا مخکې د طالبانو نه مخکې لکه چې قانون رضایي ورته اشاره وکړه د طالبانو نه مخکې صورتحال ډېر ناوړه حالاتو په افغانستان کې نو دا چې د طالبانو کوم مثبت کارونه دي هغه ټول نظر انداز کړي یا مثلا بل حکومت راشي د بل حکومت هغه مثبت کارونه نظر انداز کړي دا سره موافقې نه ده داسې کار باید ونیسي. زه غواړم چې افغانان باید له دې فرصت نه ګټه واخلي لکه رابین محمد چې وویل چې امریکا غواړي په دې وطن کې سوله راولي نو افغانانو ته پکار ده له دې فرصت نه ګټه واخلي ځکه چې امریکا قوت لري او امریکا کولی شي د سولې په مسله کې مرسته وکړي. په همدې شکل طالبان هم باید له دې فرصت نه استفاده وکړي لپاره د دې چې جنګ کې یګانه طرف چې متضرر کېږي هغه ملت ده. د ملت باید ملت بیچاره ډېر ځورېدلی ده 80% نه زیات مسکینان دي له تعلیم نه محروم دي. باید طالبان سیاسي پروسې ته داخل شي د افغانستان په سیاست کې راشي دلته ونډه واخلي په جنګ کې نور ملت تباه کېږي. بله مسله دا د امریکایان هم باید له دې فرصت نه استفاده وکړي. که امریکایان له دې فرصت نه استفاده ونه کړي د چین او د روس او د پاکستان مثلا د اتحاد په جوړېدلو باندې په مقابل د امریکا کې شاید نور خطرات هم امریکا ته متوجه شي. په یوازې توګه امریکا شاید دا جنګ په مخ ونه تللی. لهذا سوال مې دا ده جناب زه وایم چې لکه اسانه لاره چې دې دا ده چې صلح وشي په افغانستان کې. مثلا په تېر اختر کې یو آتشبس وشو اوربند وشو د طالبانو او د حکومت په منځ کې تر درې ورځو پورې هېڅ چیرې جنګ نه شوی او کوم څوک طرف شوی. د دې مطلب دا ده که چېرته د افغانستان حکومت او طالبانو صلح وکړي او امریکا په دې کې مرسته وکړي په دې ملک کې صلح راتلای شي ارامي راتلای شي او اسانه لاره هم همدا ده. سوال مې دا ده د رابین رافل سره رابین رافل وایي چې د امریکې په سیاست کې تغییر راغلی. په رښتیا هم امریکا غواړي چې په افغانستان کې سوله راولي او که غواړي موږ خو دا عقیده لرو چې امریکایان کولی شي پاکستان فشار راوړي طالبان هم دې ته قانعېږي او که د طالبانو سره مذاکرات وشي په دې وطن کې سوله راځي. او بشرا ګوهر نه زه په پښتنو په طالبانو یې ډېر اعتراضات وکړل پښتنو یې ملاتړ وکړله خو زه له دې نه پوښتنه کوم ولې واقعیتونه نه وایاست په طالبانو پاکستان کې چا رامنځته کړي تاسو د تاریخ شکایت کوئ چې چا رامنځته کړي دي څوک ورسره مرسته کوي دي خو هېڅ نوم وانخیست.
Right, so we can go start answering some of these questions. I think.
One question, please, from Iranian scholar that
Sure. Okay. Can we have that last? That'll be your last question. I was going to come back to you, but please.
Thank you. I'm Stefan from the University of Herat. I avail myself of this opportunity to express my thanks to the people of Afghanistan. Yes, I'm Stefan from the University of Tehran. I would like to express my thanks to the people of Afghanistan and one comment and one question. As for the peace process, I would like to ask one question. Is there a peace process here? Yes and no. Is there a war here? Yes and no. Is Afghanistan in a state of limbo? Yes and no. Then what is it? It is just balance of power. And what you need is the armistice regime. Is a truce regime. Out of the armistice regime, then we can enact and codify some soft law. The soft law should be based on regional power and involving regional actors. As for his third speaker, I would like also to...
the third speaker, Mr. Lai?
Yes, which was in Farsi, and I would like to ask in Farsi. میخواستم ببینم که آیا این ابزاری که شما میگید طالبان استفاده کرده این ابزار واقعا ابزار هست یا اینکه همونطور که از زمان هراکلیتوس و از زمان هیگل و از زمان مارکس ما دیدیم که در هر سندی در هر نسبیتی یک نوع تز آنتیتز بوده، کانترادیکشن بوده. آیا این کانترادیکشن در سنت بوده، در شریعت بوده که باعث این شده یا اینکه این زیرکی طالبان بوده که تونسته استفاده کنه؟
خیلی ممنون. If we can, we definitely out of time, so I'm sorry I can't take all the questions. But can we? This is what, sir?
The translator said he could not translate the last question.
أمي سوال آخر اگر ترجمه کنید.
آقای محترم دو بار به زبان انگلیسی اما آخر کردتان اگر
Okay, regarding the third speaker, I would like to ask as to whether or not this contradiction is located in Sharia, in Sunnah, as regarding to thesis and antithesis, dialectic approach, which stems from Heraclitus to Hegel to Marx and probably to Sharia. In any given instrument and argument, whether legal, whether that's religious, whether in United Nations Charter, whether in different constitutions, we see some contradictions, and this contradiction results in some kind of different interpretation, different construction and construction. So when you say that there is the Taliban strategy, and Taliban has used as a means Sharia and different interpretation of Sharia, and this has resulted into, let's say, this situation. I would like to ask if this contradiction is within the express wording of Sharia, within the express wording of Sunnah, or it is because of the crafty or the smart character of Taliban that's used to interpret the Sunnah. Whether it is because something is wrong in Sharia or something is wrong with the strategy of Taliban. Which one is it? As Hegel, as Marx, as Heraclitus argued, in every given document there is a thesis. And this thesis has its own antithesis. And the philosophy of, let's say, demise locates in the thesis and antithesis.
Very much. Thank you. Right, we've definitely run out of time, and if we could quickly go through a couple of remarks. We started with you. I think it's really important to at least comfort our friend, Mr. Khairi, about a hasty peace deal.
Just very quickly, I appreciate everything that Ambassador Leiter said. He's absolutely right, and I should clarify a couple of things. One, part of the point I was trying to make is that there has been a significant change in the U.S. policy. They are not only prioritizing a peace process, or call it what you like, reconciliation, peace efforts, whatever, and they've put someone quite qualified in charge of this. That this is new and extremely important. And when I say Ambassador Khalilzad's a man in a hurry, what I meant was he was in a hurry to get started. He's moving around, making his introductory calls with great speed. He's been on the road for a month. So he's anxious to move beyond some of the conventional wisdom, the sorts of formulations I was suggesting that people need to challenge. But I think he appreciates, and certainly anybody in the U.S. government who's worked with this appreciates that, one, this will be a long process. It has to be deliberate, it has to be thorough, and that the Americans can't do it alone. And certainly not without the Afghans and with the benefit of others. There are too many players involved. So just to clarify, because I think I probably left the wrong impression, I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that answered two questions. Two last questions. I think we had a question for you vis-a-vis the Emirate, Islamic Emirate.
Actually, Taliban in last 17 years, this war with America, and before 5 years, governance experience, they are changing and they now coming with new ideas and new procedures. I'm sure they will keep the present structure of the fundamental issues like ANA foundation, police, and other structure, but need improvement. As I know, now they got experience, and might be they are not willing to come back with the name of Emirate Islamic. It will be a name of Islamic government, like our neighborhood countries. And regarding the power sharing, as I know, Taliban will not deal with the present government like Hizb Islamic, but they want to be involved in, to be member of the government upcoming, and that government will be acceptable for all parties, including ex-Mujahideen, ex-communists, and ex-Taliban. So they want to be a member of the political policy, but not the government. It is recognized presently by international community, and it is not representative government of the Afghanistan community. It is installed by America and supported by America, and we cannot say it is our government. Thank you.
سوال آخر برای شما بود بخرم. از شما بود؟
قسمت اول سوال شد که آیا مشکل در شریعت و سنت در افغانستان وجود داشته بوده یا اینکه طالبان زیرکانه از این استفاده کردن. من باور می‌کنم مثل که در متن تشریح شد که طالبان دین و شریعت و ارزش‌های دینی و سنت‌های حاکم بر جامعه افغانستان را به خاطر جلب توجه افکار عمومی، به خاطر جلب لشکر جنگی از خلیجات افغانستان به حیث یک ابزار استفاده کردن و این زیرکی نه تنها طالبان به عنوان یک جریان، به عنوان یک مجموعه خود نهضت اصلاح طلب اسلامی نام گذاشتن، بلکه این زیرکی کسانی که به عنوان حامیان طالبان در یک فرمول پیچیده منطقه‌ای و جهانی سر از این محفوظ کردن. با شناختی دقیق که جامعه افغانستان داشتن و شناختی که از مردم افغانستان با توجه به باور عمیقشان نسبت به معتقدات دینی داشتن از این ابزار استفاده کردن. بخش دوم برمیگرده به اینکه با طالبان مثلا ما هنوز گام‌های اولیه را در قسمت صلح با طالبان برنداشتیم. من فکر می‌کنم مشکل طالبان باور شخصی میگه که مشکل طالبان در افغانستان بیش از آنکه جنگ داخلی داشته باشد جنگ خارجی داشته. یعنی اینکه دولت مخالفین مسلح افغانستان ناراض از حکومتداری در افغانستان رسیدگی نشده به مشکلاتشان، این یک فاکتور بسیار کوچکی از بحران ناامنی در افغانستان است. فاکتور اصلی مثل که من گفتم فرمول‌هایی که در سطح منطقه شکل گرفت و باعث شکل گیری طالبان شد. بنابراین در روند صلح افغانستان اگر بیایم قانون اساسی را از سر بنویسیم یا تقسیم قدرت صورت بگیرد یا حکومت و طالبان در همه این موارد تا زمانی که باید بین‌المللی قضیه را جدی در نظر نگیریم، تا اون زمان مشکل طالبان همچنان پابرجا خواهد بود. چون برداشت ما است که طالبان صرفا جنگ داخلی نداره مشکل، چون جنگ بین‌المللی بیشتره، بنابراین باید خواستگاه‌های اصلی طالبان مورد حرکت قرار داده شود. به همون خاطر که در خیلی از موارد ما پیشنهاد کرده که در کنار شورای عالی صلح افغانستان، در کنار یک تعریف می‌کنیم که با کدام مکانیزم و با کیها طرف هستیم و کیها پیش‌گیری صلح افغانستان باید دستگاه دیپلماسی یا سیاست خارجی کشور هم به این ترتیب ساخته شود. چون برمیگرده به ابزارهایی که طالبان به عنوان ابزار سیاست خارجی و از کشورها استفاده شده و خوبه که در کنار شورای عالی صلح دستگاه دیپلماسی کشور هم
Taliban's Afghan government. Now, to put the Afghan government, which is a legitimate people's government, and the support to it as same as the support to the Taliban or the non-state actors or the anti-Pashtun groups is very strange from me. We have to accept that Afghanistan is legitimate. That is what the Taliban would like us to believe, that Afghanistan is not a legitimate government, that it is a corrupt government, and we don't want to talk to them. This is something that I feel is very strange. Now, the other thing was misunderstood, and that was when I had made a comment that when we talk about integration of the foot soldiers, definitely, if they accept the constitution, if they accept the government, then there is a process through which they could be integrated by the Afghan government and the Afghan people. But the Taliban, in my opinion, and this is purely my own opinion, that they have to be brought to book. They have to be questioned. They can't be just given, okay, now you can enter the political process. That is what we are trying in Pakistan right now. Mainstreaming of extremism and Talibanization. And I am against it there, and I would not recommend it here also. But it is my view. The other comment made was, if not talks, war is also not the solution. I agree. I don't think war is a solution, but making these talks with the Taliban as an end in itself is wrong. And that is something that we need to be debating and discussing. I feel that the people have been excluded from the whole process. The real stakeholders have been excluded from the process. We are just talking about war games and war, and those who are who should be isolated and excluded. One more, please. Mr. Mutmaeen said, and there's one question from there also. He said that we should not take rigid positions. I would agree. For peace, we have to take everyone along, and we need to build consensus. But then he outlined a very rigid position that the Taliban has taken. So, I mean, the other side also has to now accept that there is constitution in Afghanistan and things like that. So, I agree that rigid positions are not going to work, but it has to be. And finally, my good friend Nazar Mohammad Mutmaeen Taliban sponsor Pakistan khudkash policy si che kam dalla samuho kari ho tasu kari لدينا زيادة مرسخة بالفلسطينيين هم بدلوا على الأراضي دوار الفلسطينيين مش كده كداهم كيلي وداهم كيلي أمن بأمن رأسي.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the panelists. We had a very nice session. Thank you all.